Hello and welcome to Meet the Music. I'm your host, Thomas Corley. Thank you for listening. We are here in our third season following our series on the many sounds of the Caribbean and into our new series, The Uniqueness of the Many Sounds of the African American Music Genres. This episode genre is funk. Joining me for insight is Dr. Rickey Vincent. Dr. Vincent is Professor of African American Studies and African Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Vincent's research areas and teaching interests are Black social history, Black popular culture, and Black popular music. He is the author of Party Music, the inside story of Black Panthers Band, how Black Power transformed soul music, and Funked, the music, the people, and the rhythm of the one. A definitive study of culture and politics of funk music, which I think will be the source of our conversation today. He's the host of History of Funk on KPFA Radio, that's 94.1. Dr. Vincent has a CD, Rickey Vincent, Food for the Funk. That's PHOOL. You can find it out there on Amazon. Okay, so I watched a few of his videos, speaking engagements on YouTube, so I think I want to slightly change the format of the show. I have no idea what Dr. Vincent has planned for our conversation, but I do know you need to be in a sponge mode and ready to soak it all in. Dr. Vincent, also known as Funkateer of the Year, welcome to Meet the Music.
Well, thank you for having me, Brother Corley, and I appreciate you taking this plunge, and let's get down into the deep end.
Yeah. So I think it's key to get the historical perspective, but when I watched one of your interviews, you kind of went to that, but I want to kind of do something slightly different. So I want to go ahead and ask you how funk got into your headspace. I mean, who introduced you to it?
Well, in the East Bay, in the San Francisco Bay Area, the East Bay, Oakland, Berkeley, Richmond, Vallejo, these are the cities that sort of grow their own. San Francisco is world famous, but we're on the B side of that single, and there's a lot of blues that come through that area, and so just growing up, the Bay Area is really mixed, so you get this heavy music vibe, and it's a mixed music vibe. There's always a Latin player with some congas in the middle of your jazz band, and your rock band has some gospel singers, and there's just all kinds of things going on. And so funk just sort of grew out of the scene out there. You had the Black Panthers with a lot of Black pride, the Oakland Raiders with a lot of this sense of the place, of the moment, of who we were. All kinds of other cultural references that just said, this is a place to be badass. You may not have the economics, but you have the attitude. And so that was always in the air. And so when I heard the music on the radio, I remember going, I don't want to hear that ballad. I mean, I was 9, 10. I was not really old enough for the slow dance tunes that my brother was into and things like that. But it was a combination of the music. My brother is a musician, so he was into the jazz funk. But that meant not some outside categories. It meant the Ohio Players. Okay, It meant Herbie Hancock. It meant Stevie Wonder. It meant all this pioneering invention in real creative music that was happening in those early 70s. But I do remember hearing Funky Worm on the radio. I do remember hearing Jungle Boogie on the radio, and I was amazed that Jungle Boogie could come harder than Funky Stuff by Kool and the Gang on the radio. And then they did a triple whammy and had Hollywood Swingin' on the radio shortly after that, all those from the same Wild and Peaceful album. And so around that time, and anyone that goes back that far, Wild and Peaceful was sort of the beginning of Kool and the Gang sort of developing this spiritual blackness, this spiritual energy that others were doing. Earth, Wind, and Fire was doing it. Mandrill was doing it. Funkadelic in their own, lunatic way. War was doing it on the West Coast. Everybody was sort of doing these collective kind of soul-searching bands that explored the music and somehow were right on time. And so I just sort of soaked all of that up. And even though I'm here in the Bay Area on the West Coast, I was hearing what Kool and the Gang was doing and what a lot of these bands from across the country were doing. Right. And ironically, I came late to the Sly and the Family Stone connection to all of this. But of course, Larry Graham and Graham Central Station was red hot and just burning it up at the time. So we were well taken care of with our funk in that early to mid 70s. So I just sort of soaked it all in. But I do remember getting knocked upside the head by Jungle Boogie, by Funky Worm, and then a year or so later, this thing called Up for the Downstroke, where some band called Parliament happened, and it just had a wiggle on there that made my nose scrunch up, and I was just like, wait a minute, this is a whole different level. And so I was too young to understand like the transition of James Brown before Bootsy and after Bootsy and things like that. All that came later. And a lot of us crate diggers, that would go to the record store just to spend an hour, looking for stuff, learning about stuff on the liner notes. Some record stores had a record player. You could hear the music, and sometimes that didn't matter. You just dug in, checked the records out, picked a whole bunch, and then had to put a few back because you couldn't afford it. So you bought a couple, and then you built from there. So you kind of build outward and build backwards to a lot. You hear an artist that you like, and now you're going to go look for more of their stuff.
So tell it like it is, my friend. Tell it like it is, because I tell my listeners all the time that you got to get down into the nitty-gritty of the liner notes.
The liner notes, the artwork, the layout. I mean, there's still information that, I missed the first 12 times around on some of these records. And some of it was the business side. I didn't care what the ASCAP publishing was back then. Now that all the sampling is a thing, we're cognizant of all of those things. But I pay attention to where something was recorded. If they say it was recorded at United Sound, if it's recorded in Los Angeles. When I noticed that Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters recorded in San Francisco in the Bay Area, then I realized, he wasn't just farming out, talent like Michael Jackson would just pluck who was the top of the line and put him on his record. He came to the Bay, Herbie did, to work with these Bay Area funk musicians and put that sound together. So you start to see how records not just are together, but how they came together just by the vinyl, sometimes before you even listen. So that was part of that process. And so that helps you kind of investigate a lot of things that you might be interested in. So that's just how it grew. I was buying records before we had a record player at the house. And can we get a record player? I got this growing stack of records here. And eventually, boom, other folks in the neighborhood had them. And this was 75, 76. That's the Way of the World, Gratitude. You had these epic releases and these epic events of these bands on national tours with spectacular budgets and shows that, this stuff was epic, and it's almost never talked about. It's just like this grand thing happened, and it was whoosh, let's talk about disco. Wait a minute. There's more there. So it just built from there, and it's, splintered off and branched off, but I was there when George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic came to the Oakland Coliseum Arena and landed the mothership. And of course, that was the cloning process. So I was like, I'm one of those on the Clones of Dr. Funkenstein album, one of those ghouls of the funk. I just had to be in it. And I was just taking that plunge, and I realized our music goes as deep as our life does, as our issues go. And and so the 70s, and I think a lot of Black music spent a lot of time trying to avoid the hard stuff. And there's nothing wrong with, deliberately, kind of saying this is what our good time is going to be right now. But the hard stuff has always been there, and the funk plays an important role in that lineage.
Yeah. So did any of your friends, childhood friends, follow you into that direction, or were you a loner when it came to funk? I mean, did were your friends listening to I don't know, rock, or were they jazz heads or?
Well, everybody had a thing at Berkeley High School. It had a very famous the jazz band, and they performed, at places not in high school. They performed at clubs and other venues, and so you had a lot of folks that were musically skilled, that were street savvy, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were a lot of people that were into the jazz, but at that time the jazz was very funked up with Stanley Clark and George Duke coming out of the Bay Area, and people were like realizing that fusion was not a question, it was a direction. And so it was like, let's just mess with this. And I found myself listening to the jazz fusion and what these folks are into, just waiting for the funk drop to come in, and they'll go dun, 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 dun. Okay, I
Yeah.
found that, and so I always sort of sniffed out the funk with the kind of jazz fusion guys I knew. My brother was into some of those bands, but he understood the straight up funk. He played the keyboard and had the Fender Rhodes piano. He had the clavinet, which is an important 70s '70s instrument, right? That keyboard that has a little twang to it. Superstition by Stevie Wonder is driven by that clavinet, right? It's not a organ, it's not a synthesizer, it's a sort of a strange electric piano with a tang to it and a twang to it that most 70s bands had then and didn't have in the 80s. If you wonder what's missing in the 80s sound from the 70s sound, you can sort of start from that. And my brother was playing that, so I was soaking up what that sound was, and the purpose of it was to have, two keyboardists and a bass guitar doing low and mid range sounds like the Ozzy Brothers Fight the Power. I mean, just layers of gurgling bass in there on top of their lyrics of, we got to fight it. I was like, okay, I'm eating this up. And there were some folks I knew they were into the rock. There's a lot of white kids that were heavy into the jam, whatever it was, and they had some of the best weed. Should I say that? It's been a long time ago. And, so we would circulate and mix, and there were shows, but most of the time I leaned towards, the jazz festivals that were around. And then when the funk bands came to town, when I was old enough or when I had the means, I was there. I was checking them out. And in retrospect, we can analyze what, Rolls Royce or the Brass Construction or Cameo was doing. But at the time, I just, was hungry for what they were delivering. And,
Yeah.
so it was pop, it was this, it was that. And even to this day, there are questions of, well, is Earth, Wind & Fire a funk band? And people are like, well, no. And P-Funk kind of whooped them one day, and they kind of said, well, we're not really a funk band. We're an Afro fusion band. But you listen to them, especially their early stuff, and their purpose. I was like, all these bands are trying to do the same thing, and I consider them funk bands because they're all trying to liberate and unify and sort of create this sort of modern Black community that has all this power from all the roots, where both our cultural roots, our political roots, Africa, all this stuff. The funk sort of connected all these dots, and that's what those bands were doing, all of them.
So can you now give us the historical perspective on it? Just to give us a rundown, where does funk start originally?
Where did it come from?
Where did it come from? What is it? An East Coast thing, North, down South thing, or where did it kick off?
That's what's interesting, because you can't. That's like asking, who played the first blues song? Well, blues was everywhere. And so who played the first funk record? But in terms of, if you want to figure it out, you have to start with James Brown. And James Brown, the godfather of soul, was running things in 1964, 1965. He was already the hardest working man in show. He was already Godfather of Soul at that point.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And running things is an important thing, okay, to be running things, because there were a lot of artists before him that weren't necessarily running things like that. They weren't in charge, in control, could tell the record company people what he was going to do and tell them to deal with it, okay? Those kind of things, if you study some of the earlier artists, some of them are very crafty, like Ray Charles, they knew how to sort of, duck and dodge what the record company wanted to get what they wanted. Okay, and so for James Brown to stand up and say, "No, I want to do it my way," to break it down, he had a great entertaining rhythm and blues show in the early 1960s, and he did a live concert that broke records and broke sales records for a black live album, things like that. And so he knew he was the top draw in his genre of music. The competition that he had, like Wilson Pickett, Joe Tex, people like that, and Ray Charles and folks. He knew he had something, and he parlayed it into a sort of an upgrade with his record company, because he just walked to another record company and started recording, even though he was under contract. And the record label, both people just said, "Well, what's going on?" And they didn't come after James Brown. They came after each other, and they worked out a deal. And this was late 1964. So in 1965, he went back to his original King Records. That the other one was Smash Records that he was on. And so we got back on King Records with a new deal, and he sort of gave him a brand new sort of opening salvo for what he was into. And that was his song, "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag." Okay. And he had a new guitarist by the name of Jimmy Nolan, who has that ding, 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 that real clean, tight, percussive rhythm guitar that Prince is famous for, but Prince had simply studied Jimmy Nolan quite extensively.
Right.
And so Jimmy Nolan, and what we heard later on was that James Brown started to recruit musicians that could play melodic instruments like they were drums, like they were in a percussive way. So the guitar would go, the horns would go, the horns would be like drum hits. And so he was creating a band that was really a giant drum orchestra, or a rhythm orchestra for him. And then he would do his get pap to peep to get pap to hit. He would do his rhythm on top of all of these polyrhythms going on. And that just sort of grow. Now, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag for him, because I interviewed him once by phone, and I said, "Where's the first one? What's the first one?" He said, "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag." That was the turnaround song, because I put it on the 1 and the 3 as opposed to the music being written on the 2 and the 4.
2 and 4.
And then I, gave him extended play. And when you go back and think about it, I mean, there are plenty of songs that can, sort of, most times you go 1, 2, 3, 4. We kind of, the Western songs all have the same construction, where you have a couple of verses and then a chorus, a couple of, and 1, 2, 3, 4. And James Brown put an emphasis so hard on that 1, you kind of forget where the 2s, the 4s, and where the normal chorus is supposed to be. The rhythm keeps going. And so that is this extended play that James Brown talks about. And then when they say, people tell James Brown, what you're doing is, this music is more African. You've Africanized it. And he didn't know what they were talking about. He was like, look, I just kept them going the way they wanted to go. But he kind of moved the music away from this, the way it was traditionally constructed, where you write a melody and it goes like 4 bars of this, 4 bars again, and then maybe 4 bars of a change of some kind, and then you bring it back. He just sort of got people to emphasize the rhythm first. And if you think about people that are hip hop heads or DJs in the 80s, they would make music, and a lot of people were, reggae music, most of the Afro diasporic music, salsa music, they would start with the rhythm and then put a melody on top of it. Okay, so
right.
James Brown kind of taught American black people to do a similar thing, to start with the beat first, and then the melody's along for the ride. And that kind of was that kind of ripped that construction of music up. But this was at the same time that all these other ideas are being ripped up. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Well, to be black was a terrible thing. And James Brown turned that into something powerful, right?
Yeah,
and so
yes, he did.
He was in the turning. He was game with turning this stuff upside down. He was one of the few people when, there was chaos, there was violence, there was a lot of despair, and nobody knew what to say or where to go. 1968, 1969, that was some tough times for a lot of people. And James Brown said, "Well, I'll just step in the arena and go for it." And so he represented this interesting mix of like community leadership that he saw himself in an old-fashioned way, come from nothing and make yourself important to the civic leaders. And he had that sort of traditional, pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality of going for success. But then the time and place he was in was where this Negro was transforming into someone black and proud. And James Brown played a very significant role in that sort of psychologically. You can measure the songs that were hits, but he was sort of the centerpiece of that. It's like Aretha Franklin was the queen of soul. You can step back and say, well, could she sing better than well, actually, she could. She can sing better than everybody else, but she also represented so much of the community. She, father was a, church preacher, and she came through the church, and she was everything about gospel and rhythm and blues, sort of fusing into one thing, which was soul. And so she lived a life of that, if you will, and in the same way James Brown lived that life. And they were just in the moment and in the right place and in the right time. And what they did was, and what James did in particular, was lay down a rhythm foundation, a rhythmic approach to making this music that all the other musicians kind of had to get a little bit of education on. And I remember my father was saying, we didn't understand Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. It's just the rhythm of it, just the cadence, the pulse was different. And we had to sort of catch up to it. And so that's what I'm saying. He made people feel something, and he put people to work trying to go in that direction, because it was a way to kind of celebrate black and proud with the feel, with this rhythm, this hard-hitting rhythmic contrast that he turned into these songs that we now know and love. And then everybody else has been trying to do it ever since. And a few other people, Sly and the Family Stone and others, were able to take the whole range of influences and pack them in to this percolating funk beat. And I remember some jazz documentary where they got on Miles Davis about trying to do too many things when he went electric. And he tried to put sitars in there, and he tried to put this in there, and he was just trying to, put all these things in. And to them, it didn't really work. And for some people, it worked. But when you put a James Brown rhythm track down, you can put anything in there. You can put, a classical piano. You could put a synthesizer sound no one's ever heard before. You can put African flute sound. You can put anything in, as long as the rhythm is in place. And I say that in an interesting way, because the rhythm foundation is there, but the rhythm is always in motion. So when I say in place, I don't mean like just a sample loop beat in place. No, the rhythm is alive, but sort of people know, where it is, and then you work with that. You tickle with it, syncopation. You work around that beat, so you know what that beat is, but you're making it, alive for that moment. So funk really built around these rhythmic innovations that James Brown primarily did, but it was soaking in this new attitude of I am self-defined. I don't have to dress like you. I'm not trying to integrate anymore. I'm going to do my thing.
This is all this is all on the other side of the protest music.
On the other
protest
side
songs,
of it.
Inside, yeah.
And so you had all these songs, it's your thing, do what you want to do. The Isaac Hayes was saying, it's your thing, do your thing. What did the Isley Brothers? Yeah, it was the Isley Brothers. It's your thing, do what you want to do. I can't tell you who to sock it to.
Right. Sock it to,
He's mixing voices. Charles Wright was express yourself. It's not what you look like. What you're doing is what you're doing when you're doing what you're doing. It was this whole kind of embrace of some idea of freedom. And if you step back, and it's not hard to see it, it's not rocket science. In the 60s, a lot of these same artists were in the suits, were in the clean, professional looking act, these bands. And that goes back to
Temptations.
Yeah, the singing groups. And everybody was kind of showing that that's sophistication. And it's also showing that's accessible. This is what white America will approve of. A nicely trimmed and groomed, set of safe colors doing this performance here. But then after the 60s, after Vietnam, after Black Power, after surviving all that, it was like even Marvin Gaye is like, I'm gonna do my thing. And I don't have to impress you. I just have to do, my thing from my point of view. And so there was a lot.
Right.
There was more of that. Now the regular stuff, I don't want to call it regular, but soul music was still churning out. You could always find dance songs and things like that. But this sort of innovation, this layer of innovation and freedom, was really, really growing. And you can find it's hard to measure unless you were there. But you can look at the music charts, the top 10 R&B hits from 74, 75, and, you'll have Gladys Knight and the Pips and the Jackson 5, but then you'll have, like we mentioned, Kool and the Gang, Ohio Players, Skin Tight, records like that. Fire was the #1 hit in America in 1975, #1 pop song, okay? So it's like you had these bands that were on the charts as much as you had the hit-making soul singers that we know and love. And both were sort of infesting each other. The soul singers knew they had to get some better musicians so that when they sing or when they finish that verse, the song is not just going to hang there. It's going to go, and then they come back. And they're going to have musicians back it up. And then the musicians and the funk groups were like, if we want to keep up, we better get us some top-notch singers, right? So Rufus, what did they do? They recruited Shaka Khan, right?
Yeah.
You had these other bands, and they, bands like the BT Express, and they had, I think her name was Barbara Joyce. She wasn't even credited, but she'd be on those great hits, and that had great grooves, and most of the bands were cognizant of having radio quality singing on top. So that's what I'm saying. They kind of pushed one another, and I loved it. It was healthy, and so I could buy I can buy a Donny Hathaway record, or Isley Brothers record. And Isley Brothers are great because Ronnie Isley could be singing over a click track and have a hit. But he had this band that could have done things. So people, all that was happening until 76 or so, when the disco industry kind of made some inroads and made it less of a inspirational thing out of the community and more of a commercial thing. I'll just stop.
Yeah, that total commercial thing. Yeah. So, let me start here. Kind of pause here for a second. I learned about your CD on one of your interviews, so I want to kind of talk about that, because I generally ask about the book. What was the spark about the CD? I mean, what was the spark for creating the CD, I should say?
obviously there's numerous influences and factors. I do remember maybe 10 years ago, Davey D, who's a very important journalist and radio host in the Bay Area, playing a song with the R&B Foundation and Cornel West doing Cornel West on top of it. And I was like, whoa. And this is really before, if folks might say Cornel West was oversaturated in the last decade or whatever you want to say, but this is before that time. And he was mostly known for Race Matters and some of his really insightful, critical race theory, which they want to get rid of. But anyway, it's another conversation. But his really insightful stuff as a scholar, as a public intellectual, he was doing these things. And then all of a sudden he was on a record. And I understood that a record has a different method of reaching people. Okay. And so that was so that really sparked me. And I reached out to the person that produced, through Davey, I reached out to the person that produced it and actually developed a relationship with Cornel West. And Cornel West is on that album, as a matter of fact, because we do a little piece together. And then I take a speech and it becomes, I call it Westworld, because he talks about how valuable funk is and people should use that information. But it wasn't simply that. I have been doing radio since 1985 is when I first got a radio program at the college radio station. And 95, maybe 97, I went from the college radio station to the big one, KPFA, which is maybe the largest and oldest non-commercial radio station in the country. And so it's been around a while and, has a big thing. And most of the DJs who come on at night after all the political talk in the day, they're lifers, right? We are into this scene for life. So you got the jazz DJs for life. You got the Grateful Dead DJs for life, the reggae DJs for life, the Latin jazz. And then, so I'm in there doing that. And partly, I knew that Sly Stone began as a DJ, but I'm not going to pretend I'm that. But I said, there's to evolve more than just, on one side of the wall, on one side of the microphone, you want to get to the next level. So that was part of it. And then the other part is I've been listening to this stuff for 30, 40 years. I think I know what the good stuff is. So let me, put it out there, take that, put that in the arena, if you will. And then the sort of the kicker was there's a producer, a brother who I've been working with on various projects for many, many years. His name is Philip Jones, Phil the Funky Instrumentalist, PTFI. So you can go on iTunes or Spotify and look up PTFI, and he has a bunch of albums, and a lot of them are kind of slick, hard, instrumental, funk grooves and things, with maybe just a few vocals. And then turns out he's produced a lot of other folks and would just sort of work with what they do and then put some big bumping funk. I thought it was like he would take their work and put the funk under it, but actually it went the other way around. I went to his house and he played me, dozens of tracks, and I would say, oh, that one, give me that one. And I'll put Junie Morrison's interview on that track and we'll turn it into a song and boom, 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 boom. And so he got sort of my message pretty quickly. And it all began by digging through his immense catalog of grooves. They're pretty much fully formed songs, instrumental songs that could have worked with a singer, could have worked with a rapper. And I just kind of sort of was connecting dots and originally just taking interviews that I have been doing, like we're doing now, and just figured I can mash up some of the important things people have said and done on my show. But then it sort of grew a little bit more, and I said, well, I better get, I can't just hide behind the intellectual veneer. And then he played a bumping tune with that bass, and I was like, man, that makes me just want to say, go wiggle. Let me get on this song, go wiggle. You know, it just kept on. Most of that goofy stuff wasn't even attempted seriously. It was just like you're bumping. Oh man, let me do this, and it just sort of organically happens. If you say,
there you go.
I am going to structure a session where I am silly this afternoon, let me do that. Anybody could tell that's a placeholder maybe, but when you're inspired, then you can do it. So I was able to get into that, and Phil Jones, PTFI, he kind of introduced me to how to work with musicians and get them in a session and get them, there's a few extra added special goodies in there. And so I sort of opened my door to how to do this thing from a different perspective, because I try to make sure they're all comfortable and respected and paid. And my brother, I was raised on horror stories of not being comfortable, not being respected, and not being paid, even though they made magical music. And so I kind of just wanted, I had a lot of sort of kind of empty vessels I wanted to fill, and it came out. And I still have a notion about that record, although I'm working on the second one and doing a lot of things. But I still want to make a vinyl out of that Fool for the Funk, because the cover art, Chris Herrod's cover art, is still mind-blowing. So I want to make a vinyl with that. I have an extended James Brown interview mix thing, extend a couple of those things. And, and a video for Thumpasaurus galacticus. People need to understand where the Thumpasaurus people came from. Anyway, so, but then that makes the serious stuff, to me, it makes it hold up. Because if you're just one or just the other, I mean, think of, even hip hoppers understand Public Enemy, for example. Chuck D delivers these hard rhymes, but you know something? Chuck D did a solo album and nobody bought it, because you want Chuck D with that hard, and then you want Flavor Flav as that exhale, yeah boy, and then you get back on it, right? And so it's that kind of mix, and George Clinton calls it silly serious, and so it's a way to kind of work around it. And we might say that even goes back to these other blues traditions and even gospel traditions of innuendo, where you're saying one thing and meaning another, right? And so it's sort of that modernized form of that.
Yeah. So I like I said, I just discovered it, so I was going to ask whether or not it was on vinyl, because I was going to try to get the vinyl, but I guess I'll do the MP3 and wait on the vinyl. Did you have an opportunity to help people who've been under a rock and who've just been listening to classical music? Do you have a list for us to introduce people?
Well, when anybody asks me, it's always a joy to do it. Now, when you do a radio show, you've sort of institutionalized that, you formalize that joy, and so you put that out every week. But I do wish I had more of a sort of direct outlet where I could say, to, if you will, to a beginner. But a lot of people, they're not beginners. Most of this stuff is hidden in plain sight. Much of this stuff won a lot of awards, sold, millions, and is in people's memory. And unfortunately, it's kind of scattered in different places. And even the funk book, it ties a lot of things together, most of which is already well known. And I remember writing the chapters, and I was like, nothing in this chapter is really a big mystery to people. It's just that they didn't necessarily link all of these things together. And so, let me put it this way. If somebody wants an introduction to funk, from wherever they're coming from, I'm happy to contribute. But it always depends on the question. I mean, when I started at college radio, I was at a punk rock radio station, a heavy metal.
I was going to ask you, what was the format? Were you forced to play something else that you didn't listen to? at college radio, or?
They tried to say they were free form because most college radio for the longest time is for kids to come in and experiment and
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. And so they billed themselves as a free form radio station, but then within that they had requirements that you play something from the punk rock bin every hour, something from the reggae bin every hour, something from the new records bin every hour, and a fourth thing that was sort of like a none of the above or something like that. So they had a weird mix of regulation and variety that you could work with. And I would just deliberately piss these people off, and I'd play, some heavy metal, some Bad Brains, or some Funkadelic, and then some Bob Marley, or even some militant reggae music, and then whatever other form, new record that came in, some hip hop, underground hip hop that no one had ever understood before, and then the rest of it is that 70s funk that I kind of came up collecting in the first place. And a lot of that stuff works as the glue in between all those genres and formats, because all of those artists were, sort of weaned on Jimi Hendrix, the band of Gypsies, the heavy metal funk of Jimi Hendrix. Okay, his last years. They all came up with Aretha and all the soul, and they all came up through Ray Charles and the rhythm and blues and the blue. I mean, that's what's so, to me, special about that period, because you have these seasoned musicians. Basically, funk was produced by folks who were trained in some other form. Okay, they were trained in some other genre, and then they came into it, as adults. And part of the magic is you don't notice that, depending on what you listen to. I didn't know who Donny Hathaway was when I first heard The Ghetto. I didn't know he was playing the piano on it at the same time as he was singing. And I didn't know that he was such a virtuoso vocalist that he could say so much with a song that has no lyrics. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you go down the path of understanding Donny Hathaway and his faith and the gospel soul of his work, that in itself is majestic and tragic, because we know he was troubled, but yet he had this effortless kind of flow that fit what the funk groove was about. And there's actually a handful of Donny Hathaway cuts, and then of course his work with Roberta Flack, and a lot of artists. I tuned into their free spirit, and so I'll play some Minnie Riperton B-side music, because she's got all kinds of instrumentation, that Stevie Wonder influence. And so I'm not one of those people that's on these Facebook threads. Is it funk? Is it not funk? Is it funk? Is it not funk? I'm like, does it have a free spirit, and does it groove, and does it give you something to your soul? And then I'm with it. You can call it whatever you want. And so for the longest time, there was all these mixes of genres, and my favorite music coming up was the artist that mixed all the genres, if you want to call them genres, mixed all the approaches together. And as much as I can say I was celebrating Kool and the Gang and Ohio Players and the Ozzy Brothers and the Parliament Funkadelic, let's face it, everybody was looking up at Stevie Wonder at this time. He was at the top of the line, right? He was Talking Book, Inner Visions, Songs in the Key of Life, Fulfilling His First Finale, right? And there was so many different moods and styles, and yet it was totally unified, and yet had all these separate elements. And it took a while before I realized a couple things. One, he was using the Sly Stone formula from Stan from 1969. If you ask Stevie, he'll tell you that. And then the other thing is, when Stevie wanted to make his most important statements out of all those albums, right? The number one hit that he did off Talking Book was Superstition. And lyrics where he had the funk on that track. The following album, the most important message songs he wanted on Inner Visions was Living for the City. Higher Ground. Some of the hardest funk tracks in his catalog were the ones he had the most to say. Those are the singles that he put out. And you could tell he was front loading the funk on his thing. You haven't done nothing. I mean, he was clearly, and any practitioner of funk knows that Stevie Wonder is still ahead of them in terms of what he was doing. Right. And so, but he was able to do that and branch out, and that inspired other artists like Earth, Wind and Fire. And then right behind Earth, Wind and Fire, you had these bands that did funky things in their work. I'm thinking of the Blackbirds and like I said, before Cameo, Brass Construction, Rufus and Shaka Khan, Graham Central Station, just a whole wave of groups kind of came up before and during 1975, and then by 76 and 77, LTD, the Commodores. I mean, you have folks that I'll just admit now, they understood the formula. They may not have lived it, but they understood it, and they could do it. But at the time the party was on, it didn't matter. Confunction. A lot of bands might be known for a ballad over here or something over there, but they do either what the technical requirements of or what the energy requirements of to give people the party, and that was basically with a band that was cooking it. And so that's kind of the home base I have. Although I will partake in that P-Funk universe, I will slide through the dimensions and go in there and inhabit that space when I like.
Well, speaking of sliding, I mean, what's your take on the subgenres of funk? I guess you could say, like Japan funk or funk metal or jazz funk. I mean, what's your thought on that fusion and the subgenres?
Well, I mean, this is just my opinion, okay? And I guess because my brother was into that jazz fusion, we watched a lot of very accomplished jazz artists really dabble in funk. And Donald Byrd did a pretty interesting series of records in the middle 70s that were sort of groove based, more R&B based than jazz based, as far as I'm concerned. And of course, Herbie Hancock, of course, George Duke. And yeah, can you legitimately have a conversation between what Charles Mingus was doing in 1963 versus what Herbie Hancock was doing in 1973? Maybe not. But the improvisation, the experimentation, the searching, growing, the sort of learning of how to get your message out to people, that was a constant. And then you had that, not talked about much, the soul jazz, the instrumental groovers, the Grant Green, folks like Lou Donaldson, that basically were making instrumental R&B, instrumental soul music, right? And they do covers of James Brown, do covers of the rhythm songs that James Brown did. And so it kind of looked like a thread of it, not all of it, but a thread of his jazz was heading towards funk. And then when you look at what Jimi Hendrix did and other black rock bands like Funkadelic, they give credit to this band called Death that got a whole movie made. They had done a couple records early on, and they weren't alone. There were a lot of alternative lifestyle black acts that were into the heavy sounds. Okay.
Right.
And they overlapped with the jazz artists that were into the heavy sounds. Okay. With the Ornette Colemans of the world. So all these folks were improvising, but I looked at the rock was heading towards the funk, the jazz was heading towards the funk, the soul was heading towards the funk. So I look at all was going to this moment, and to me that moment is Earth, Wind and Fire concerts in the 70s, where they'd have like 4 vocalists and then 2, 3 guitarists, and then 4 or 5 horn players, and they'd have all of the different traditions sort of in play at the same time on the same records. And we would sort of soak them up. And if you sort of unpacked it, you're like, this is saying all these traditions belong to us. We are all
Right.
of this stuff.
Sure.
And then what happens? The funk tends to blow up, and then here comes disco coming along, and the industry says, oh man, that's cheaper, and they're not a bunch of black guys, and we can just get that same dance beat and make the same beat work for everybody, which was an insult. But what happened was, disco came along, built on the excitement of funk. I consider disco like white people trying to do Soul Train for themselves, right?
Right.
Trying to have their own Soul Train, experience. And on one level, there's nothing wrong with that. On another level, that's kind of exploiting. But what happens is the DJs come along, and disco DJs played a role, and the DJs in the neighborhoods who wish they could make as much money as disco DJs, they came along, and what were they doing? They were reconstructing those funk songs. And so hip hop, especially the early hip hop, was by the numbers built around the funk, because they didn't have their own recordings. They had funk recordings to work with. So, and then your techno and your house music. And so to me, everything they call EDM comes out of that. And some people say, yes, disco created the EDM. I'm like, well, you step one step further back, and you can say all this stuff comes out of this funk moment. Okay.
Right.
And
right.
Now, one may not want to agree, but at least it's the way I can teach my classes, so folks have some sense of how these separate things are all connected. And I just happen to say they're all connected through the funk, and then they spray out from the funk, and then it's so that you can just gain perspective. And that's the thing. It's tough for people that just say, well, there's that reggaeton playing, and like you said, that Japanese funk band. Well, what about the South American band over there? Well, when you see that they're all sort of hearing the echoes of this
Afrobeat,
they're all sort of catching the wave, and that's in the introduction to the funk book. The wave of that bomb, that funk explosion that James Brown set out it blew up, and it's like the background radiation to the Big Bang. That's what I put in there. It's like everybody they can feel it. And then when you work your way back to it, then you're talking about what James Brown did. And it wasn't him by himself. It was the people and the times and the struggles folks were in. And they just weren't going to lay down any longer. And that was that period. I mean, you could talk about that period for every group, the women's group, the Stonewall riots for the LGBT community. You had all these different moments, right? And one of those moments was Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. And then everything James Brown represented before that, and in the maybe 5 to 10 years after that, they kind of built on that and said, I'm going to do it my way. I'm fully formed now. And so I want to get paid. So I want to make it entertaining, but I got to say my thing. And I got to use these beats that I see on Soul Train every Saturday. So I better get that going.
Yeah. Well, hey, Dr. Vincent, I appreciate your time. So are you on social media? Can you plug that for yourself?
I'm on Facebook, and I have a list of the history of funk with Rickey Vincent on KPFA. And that's where I do most of my connecting. Because
and your website?
The website, RickeyVincent.com, has a nice little blurb behind the scenes of that album. And the other work that I do, the academic work I do, the teaching that I do, the other topics, and they all kind of revolve around, the music and the culture, and particularly the awakening. There's a lot of folks that'll kind of tell you about all the tragic elements that we've struggled through. And if you think about it, there really aren't that many books about the 70s. There aren't that many books about when Black folks had means, what did they do? And can we celebrate that as opposed to lament the tragedies? And it just so happens that this stuff happened. And unfortunately, it's the one tragedy is this grand tale isn't told well enough and put into perspective with all the other great accomplishments that our skilled and conscious entertainers, were able to do. So that's a bit of a thorn that I'm working to try to address.
Do you find in your lectures that people of non-color are hungry for this, dialogue or information?
I think it's both. A lot of young people, this is such a revelation to them to sort of see it all placed in perspective. And a lot of them, like I said, they don't know about the epic concert tours that these bands did that are just sort of vanished from history. And then, when you see the Kennedy Center honors or the Lifetime Achievement Grammy Awards, you can get an abstract sense that these artists are respected, but you don't really necessarily know, the scope and the power and this ability to, give something that the world really needed then. And that was sort of an inspiration built out of this Black Power nation, if you will. So not everybody was ready to appreciate the militant positions of the Black Panthers, but a lot of people could kind of soak in their courage and their resolve, but you didn't necessarily want to join that group, but you could feel that inspiration. And the artists were soaking that up and reflecting that in the music. And part of that was showing that they got jazz, showing that they got church and soul, gospel chops, showing that they have, training in European music and chord changes and things like that. And they have the street groove, and they could put it all together. And those bands are capable of doing that. Despite what the people that hated on Miles Davis for trying it, the funk bands could do it, put it all on the one. And that was the lesson. James Brown told Bootsy to do whatever you want, just come back on the one. And other artists said, I can add all these other things and bring it in on the one, and it's grooving, people are dancing, people are freeing themselves. And that's kind of a healthy place to be.
So what else? Do you have anything in the future here? Are you writing? You mentioned a second album. What projects you have coming up?
I'm working on the second album because that's the most exciting. And every artist I've dealt with, the most exciting is when you're making the album. The least pleasant is when you're trying to promote the album and nobody knows or cares. So that's one thing. But I'm writing actually a publishing company out of Russia told me last year they translated my entire funk book into Russian. I was like, wait a minute, what? And did I have anything new that could be added, like a new chapter or a new introduction? And I was on the fence because I didn't even know, it just didn't process, although the book is in Italian and a Japanese translation.
Cool.
And then I got my royalty statement, which is usually, if I get more than $100 for my royalty statement after 20 years in print, I'm happy. And they gave me I got a big chunk because they had paid for the foreign language rights to print it in Russian. And I was like, wait a minute. So then I started looking up funk in Russia, and they got funk DJs. Anatoly Ice loads up his funk mixes on these shows. You get these crazy, and they're all into the same funk that I was writing about. And so it sort of inspired me. So, okay, I'll give it to you. So there's a new introduction that'll be out. I don't know if you can read Russian. I don't know if you can read it. And then, so I'm working on chapter 23 of that book, kind of what happened to the music since, the millennium. Where did it go? And it's pretty much diffused everywhere, but just sort of catching some of the main highlights is what I'm doing. And then kind of looking into getting a second edition produced in the USA.
Okay, cool.
That's on the front burner, and then a few other projects on the back burner that still involve kind of music and memory, and some of it involves the work with the Black Panther legacy stuff. And there's a 55th annual Black Panthers sort of the more reunion type event that they asked me to be a part of in October in the Bay Area. And then my brother, my homeboy Scott Brown, who works at UCLA, he's writing the book on Dayton funk, which is a necessary thing. And all the bands from Dayton, Zap, Lakeside, Slave, Ohio Players, Sun, Phaso, members of Heatwave, that's nearby to where Bootsy and the Ozzy Brothers in Cincinnati were operating. So, and it's called the funk capital of the world for a reason. And I don't argue with that, even if I know the Bay Area contributed its thing. But so he connected with the academy out there, and so the University of Dayton put on the first Dayton Funk Symposium and Dance Party in 2018, and they scheduled another one, but it got delayed because of the situation, obviously, we're in. So the second Funk Symposium and Dance Party is scheduled for November in Dayton, and they asked me to be the keynote this time, and so hopefully we'll keep that going. And there's a brother there named David Webb who has the Dayton Funk Center, and so he's trying to build, like a lot of folks are building, these legacy institutions, these museums, right? These Black music museums and things like that.
Right.
So funk is at that point, particularly because the artists are at that point where they deserve lifetime legacy recognition for all the joy they've given us. And so I'm kind of going in that direction. Also, doing as much with multimedia and the funk documentaries and some of the film work that folks are doing that kind of keep it. Some are asking me for information, and I'm sort of connecting, just spreading the funk. That's what I'm here to do.
All right, I appreciate it, and I hope my listeners appreciate it. Well, Dr. Rickey Vincent, thank you for your time, and thank you for being on Meet the Music.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
I want to thank Dr. Rickey Vincent for opening our ears to funk. I hope you gained a new perspective on the funk genre. I'm going to revisit those Stevie Wonder albums he mentioned. Please be sure to check out the Funkateer of the Year CD, Rickey Vincent, Fool for the Funk. That's PHOOL, the number 4, the funk. Click on the link below in our description. As always, please share the link to this episode and your favorite episode with someone who wants to expand their playlist. They can listen directly from our website, meetthemusic.buzzsprout.com, or wherever they get their podcasts. If this was your first episode, be sure to listen to our most downloaded episode on Zydeco with Michael Tesserand, or start at the beginning of the series with Dr. Raylan Rabaka on rap and hip-hop culture. Thank you for joining us on our musical journey. Remember, if it's Monday, it's Meet the Music.